I know that we can. I know darn well we can work it out. Oh, yes, we can. I know we can. Yes, we can. And why can't we if we want to? Yes, we can. I know we can make it work. I know we can make it if we try. Oh, yes, we can. Yes, we can. Great gosh, your body. Yes, we can. I know we can.
Thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. Today's guest is one of the greatest lawyers since lawyers have been lawyering, if you will. Tom Mesereau, the one and only. Tom Mesereau is best known for defending and acquitting Michael Jackson in his world-famous trial in Santa Barbara. Michael was acquitted of all 14 counts. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, 14 counts of child molestation. Tom grew up in New York City, or the New York area, I should say. He graduated with honors from Harvard University, earned a Master's of Science degree from London School of Economics, believe it or not, and his law degree from University of California Hastings College of Law. He founded and manages the Mesereau Free Legal Clinic, which is of interest to many people, for people who are poverty-stricken and cannot afford high-powered lawyers such as himself. He's represented the rich and the famous, such as Bill Cosby, Wesley Quick, Terry Bonner, Larry Carroll, and on and on and on, and he won most of those high-powered trials. Tom, again, as I said, is one of the greatest lawyers in the world, hands down. Unless Johnny Cochran was living, Tom would be the only guy I would want to represent me in a murder trial, if you will. Before we bring Tom on, I do want to ask all of you to help us to sponsor this podcast. Believe it or not, you can produce a high-powered podcast such as this from home, and you can almost do it alone. But what you can't do is house the homeless and feed the hungry without help. I'm not going to spend 35 minutes begging people. I'm just going to ask those of you who are so inclined, would you please go to yeswecanworshipcenter.org, scroll down, click donate now. Your donation, whether it is $100,000, $10,000, or $5, will help us house the homeless and feed the hungry. Let's get ready for the one and only Tom Mesereau. Take a look at this. Thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we can with Pastor Sherman D.Manning. As I said earlier, we have one of the greatest lawyers on planet Earth, the one and only, Mr. Tom Mesereau. Mr. Mesereau, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Pastor Manning. It's an honor and a privilege to be on the show, and thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Okay, of course, most of my viewers will already know who you are, but just, if you don't mind, tell me who you are.
My name is Tom Mesereau. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I defend people who are charged with various forms of criminal conduct, and I make the system work, and I try to humanize people and give them their freedom, which others are threatening to take away.
Wow. Tell me this. You've done hundreds of thousands of interviews. Probably you don't get asked this question a lot, but can you tell me something about your mom and dad? Tell me about your parents. Who are they? Who were they?
My father's name was Thomas Arthur Mesereau. I'm Thomas Arthur Mesereau, Jr. Mm-hmm. He was a West Point graduate, the United States Military Academy. He was an All-American football player. He was a heavily decorated parachute battalion commander in World War II in the Philippines. He was on the battleship Missouri during the Japanese surrender, and he participated in the occupation of Japan as an aide to General Douglas MacArthur. He was an assistant football coach at West Point, and he was in the restaurant business at various levels, private and corporate. My mother was born in New York. She was a beautiful, wonderful woman. She just directed me so well through life, always encouraged me, never gave up on me, no matter what trouble I got into. Her father was an Italian restaurant owner in Manhattan at 48th and Broadway in New York City. Mm-hmm. She was creative. She was unconventional. She was just unpredictable. She was courageous and a determined person who inspired me very much. Both my parents did many, many nice things for me. I love them both and appreciate everything they did.
Wow. And what was your mom's name again?
Luisa, Luisa.
Okay. And let me ask you, did they live to see you become the successful attorney that you've become? Did they get to see any of that?
My mother did. My mother was alive during the Michael Jackson trial. She was at an assisted living facility during the verdict, and she did live to see it, and I'm so happy she did.
Wow. And you say that she was unpredictable. Is that where you get your trademark unpredictableness during trials, as I've read?
That's certainly where I get some of it for sure.
Okay.
She would never take no for an answer. She had severe health problems when she was young that almost took her life.
Mhm.
She became very determined she was going to restore her health. She began to not trust doctors so much, and she was one of the first people in the history of the state of New Jersey, where I was raised, to open a health store. And she then moved to Southern California, and she would freely just give advice to people who had emotional and physical problems like she had had. And she was really one of a kind, wonderful woman, and I loved her very dearly.
Wow. And, you and I first spoke in 1995 before you were half as well known as you are now. So we've basically known each other for 28 years telephonically. I went back and reviewed the record the other day. Let me ask you, what made you, because I see where you have a degree in economics also?
I have a master's degree from the London School of Economics in London, England, in international relations. I studied economics. I also studied international affairs.
So when did you settle on, I'm going to be a lawyer? When did that happen?
My father didn't go to law school. As I said before, he went to West Point, the United States Military Academy. He took some law courses, and he always encouraged me to consider law school. He always said that if you don't know what you really want to do, he said, go to law school because it preserves a lot of options. You can go into business, you can go into law, you can go into government, you can go into politics. There's so many things you can do, and you can find where you really belong much more easily with a law degree. So I took his advice, and it was the smartest thing I ever did. I was a corporate lawyer, I was a civil litigator, I was a prosecutor, and it took a little while for the light bulbs to go off and for me to realize criminal defense is your calling. It's more than just a job, it's a calling, and I'm very lucky I found it, and it's been a wonderful career for me.
Wow, it's a small world. I was interviewing attorney Richard Hirsch, and he was saying that I forget the particulars of the story, but when he was trying to decide what he was going to do, someone yelled out, try law school, because same thing your father said, it opens up a lot of avenues and options and things of that nature. I also am familiar with the fact that you used to have, or maybe still have, a free legal clinic. Can you tell us what that's all about?
Well, starting in the early 90s, I was attending First African Methodist Episcopal Church, FAME, in South
Yes.
Los Angeles.
Right.
And I attended that church primarily because of Pastor Cecil Murray, who was one of the most inspiring, brilliant people and leaders that I've ever seen. And I used to volunteer at the First AME Church Free Legal Clinic. I then started volunteering at other legal clinics. There were clinics dealing with black males in the justice system at Crenshaw United Methodist Episcopal Church. There were clinics at West Angeles Church of God. I started volunteering for different projects for various civil rights groups in South LA. And at one point after the Michael Jackson verdict, my name was fairly big out there. So I decided to start the Mesereau Free Legal Clinic. We had a wonderful board of directors from local volunteers. It was a clinic that basically attracted lawyers, law students, college students, activists, people who care about the community. And we would meet on weekends, and we would offer any kind of advice we could, depending on what volunteer lawyers came to the clinic. And we did a lot of good. We would give advice on probate and wills, on marriage law, marital law, on criminal law, on civil litigation, auto accidents, you name whatever it is. Whatever we could help, we did. And we always invited people to come back. Our feeling was that at least you'll get somebody to talk to.
Right.
Because people would come in with feeling hopeless, nobody would help them, and at least we could talk to them. Sometimes we help them, and sometimes we solve their problems. But I'm a great believer in free legal clinics. If you look at what a free legal clinic is, nobody loses, everybody gains. The people that need assistance and direction and information, they gain. The people who give it, look what it does for their souls, their hearts, their spirit, their outlook on life. I mean, nobody loses in this type of situation. And I'm a great believer in free legal clinics. The pandemic knocked us out for a while.
Right.
We're trying to restore, at least on a Zoom basis, what we had before the pandemic. But as you well know, Pastor Manning, the pandemic just scared a lot of people from coming to communal locations, and it just set the whole world on its head. So we're still responding from it. But I'm a great believer in free legal clinics, and I think every church should have one. And we have documentation. We have documents that will tell you how to organize. We used to not have a competitive or proprietary position with our clinic. We always invited people to come from other churches. We'd show them how we do it, and everybody benefits.
Wow. Well, I'll have to look into that. And you're correct. The pandemic, I don't want to go off on a tangent regarding what it has done to the church and how many people have not come back to church. And I think that we might lose some of them. I don't want to say forever, but it seems like some of them just are reluctant to assemble together again. So you sent me a video, a documentary, William Kunstler. And it was one of the greatest documentaries I've ever seen in my lifetime. Tell me how he inspired you and how he influenced you as an attorney. When did you first hear of Mr. Kunstler?
Well, I heard of Mr. Kunstler when I was a teenager in the 60s, and he was one of the more visible civil rights lawyers. He was an activist. He was a revolutionary. He was a very, very combative, courageous, attack dog criminal defense attorney. And he had a belief that all minorities are up against it in the justice system, that no minority member is going to get a fair trial. That was his outlook.
Right.
And he decided to try and compensate by being extremely aggressive, extremely technical, extremely outrageous at times. And he was a warrior. He was someone he went to Yale University, he went to Columbia University Law School, he had a comfortable practice in Westchester, New York.
Right.
And one day he woke up and decided, I'm not doing things that I need to do. And he went down south and joined Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the civil rights movement, and just worked in Mississippi, worked in Alabama, came back to New York. He would take pro bono cases. He would take some of the most difficult cases imaginable. He said everybody deserves zealous representation, everybody deserves a fair trial, and nobody should be denied anything because of their race or because of their income. And a very inspirational lawyer to me. He wrote a number of books, a book about his experiences in the South. He wrote a book before he passed away called My Life as a Revolutionary Lawyer, which is a very, very inspiring document. And he generated a lot of extremes in reaction. I mean, there's a book written by a historian and law professor in Alabama called The Most Hated Lawyer in America, William Kunstler.
Okay.
And that's a very appropriate title. I actually spoke to the author during one of my trips to Alabama to handle a murder case.
Wow.
And he said that researching the life of William Kunstler was one of the most delightful things he'd ever done.
Wow.
And that documentary that I suggested you look at was done by his two daughters.
Wow.
They did it out of love and great respect for their father.
Yes.
They didn't always agree with everything he did or every client he had or every position he took.
Right.
But they really were inspired by him. And I think it's a fabulous documentary. I believe it came out in 2009, and it's called Disturbing the Universe.
Yes. Yes. I watched it.
Emily and Sarah Kunstler.
Yes. I watched it a couple of Saturdays ago, and I shared it with my good Jewish lawyer friend, attorney John Eisen. I've told him to watch it also. Mentioning murder trials and mentioning Alabama, don't you also do some pro bono work or some type of work in Alabama for people on death row?
Well, for well over 20 years, I have volunteered at least once a year to do a murder case in Alabama free of charge. And unfortunately, a couple of years ago, my dear friend Charlie Salvaggio, a warrior in the courtroom,
Right.
A legend in Birmingham, Alabama, suddenly passed away at the age of 66. I'm still devastated by his passing.
I read that.
But I met him in 1996. I was called by a lawyer who does a lot of death penalty work, who said that two white lawyers in Birmingham were defending a homeless black man charged with murdering a beautiful white girl from a prominent family in a professional part of town where people in graduate school, young professionals used to congregate. And he was, there were a lot of racial overtones to the case. They were getting death threats, and they heard about me and they wanted to meet me if I was interested. And I got on a plane, flew to Birmingham, met the two lawyers, Charlie Salvaggio and Wilson Myers, and we agreed to defend this homeless man. And we acquitted him. And there was a lot of commotion. Charlie started getting death threats on his machine.
Right.
And in true Charlie fashion, he went to a local news station for an interview and played on the station the death threats he was getting, and pulled out a gun and said, "You know where to reach me."
Yeah, I saw that. I
And,
read that.
and his life was a life of tremendous. What's the word? I mean, he just was one of a kind.
Wow.
He believed in justice. He believed in trials. Every trial he did was like the last trial he'll ever do, and the most important trial he ever did.
Wow.
And he was a very interesting, complex fellow. He was Italian. He grew up in a largely black project in a very poor part of town. In those days, he told me, the rednecks would refer to Italians as well as blacks with the N-word.
Wow.
And his father abandoned the family. There were 4 kids. His mother used to work as a waitress morning, noon, and night. Come back at 11 o'clock to do the wash. She couldn't afford a washing machine. Sometimes they were out of food. They would knock on doors for help. He never liked mashed potatoes because he ate so many mashed potato sandwiches for lunch when he was growing up because they had no other food.
Wow.
And he was self-made. He worked as a construction worker, a truck driver, a roofer. He sold vacuum cleaners. He was a computer programmer, and then he saved money, went to a local liberal arts college, highly respected, was admitted to Harvard but had no money to go. Then he went to a local law school and became the best known criminal defense lawyer in Birmingham and my dear friend. And so for over 20 years, I went down every year, at least once, and did a murder case with him, many of them death penalty cases. I didn't do appellate work, I did trial work.
Right.
And we had some very high profile cases in the Birmingham area. I also agreed to do a death penalty case free in Mississippi, the only case I've done in Mississippi. And Charlie and Wilson joined me pro bono to help this young man who was facing execution. And we got a good plea bargain on the eve of trial. He needed psychiatric help. He'd been in a number of institutions.
Right.
And the death penalty was off the table. And he basically agreed to life with the possibility of parole, and they would give him therapy and treatment. So I had a wonderful, wonderful time going down south with my friends. Unfortunately, Charlie just passed away, and Wilson has left Alabama to be a public defender on an Indian reservation.
Oh, wow.
Now, these are special human beings.
Yes.
Very few lawyers have their idealism, have their courage, they're incorruptible. They are great lawyers. They make the system work and they make the system proud. And it's been an honor for me to know them and work with them. But that's in limbo a little bit now because of Charlie's sudden passing.
Right. Right. So you've got to regroup and figure out what to do about
Yes.
that. Okay. Mentioning regrouping, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back after this. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me. We'll get right back to that powerful interview with the modern day Clarence Darrow, the one and only Tom Mesereau. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are watching me, Yes We Can Worship Center is the only church in this city that houses the homeless and feeds the hungry every day of the week. I am asking every lawyer watching me, every pastor, every law student, every law professor, please stop what you're doing at the end of this show. Go to yeswecanworshipcenter.org. Scroll down, click donate now, send your donation. No donation is too large, no donation is too small. Some of you are in a position that you could help us with $25,000, $50,000. Some of you could do $500, whatever you can do. Let's help get people off the streets. Los Angeles, Skid Row area looks like a third world country. The person who can make a difference is you and me. Please help us today. Now let's get back to this interview with Tom Mesereau. A crazy question for you, Mr. Mesereau. If you were charged with murder right now in Los Angeles, who would you hire to defend you?
Well, there are a number of lawyers that I think are tremendous. Who I would hire would depend on the situation in a atmosphere that's constantly changing. I mean, we have demographics changing in Los Angeles. We have politicians and political movements changing in Los Angeles.
Right.
We have all kinds of fluid situations when it comes to jury pool, when it comes to the politics of the DA's office, which is the largest DA's office in the country, over 1,000 DAs.
Right.
We have politics everywhere, fluidity everywhere. seas of change everywhere. And I guess a lot of the circumstances would depend on what I was charged with, what they said happened, who their witnesses were, what their theories of guilt were. There's so many things I would have to put into that.
So can you
And
give me
I
three?
don't want,
Can you give me three lawyers if you were charged with first degree murder tomorrow and you had to hire one of three? Can you get? And I know you don't want to make anyone else look bad, and there are a lot of great lawyers, but considering just if you had three options, which three persons would you hire?
well, there's Jennifer Keller in Orange County, a fabulous lawyer who's doing more civil work these days, but a fabulous lawyer. There's Roy Black in Florida.
Aha, I'm familiar with
Um,
Roy Black.
Pardon me?
I say I'm very familiar with Roy Black.
Yeah, Roy Black's a great lawyer. Just got an acquittal in one of the Varsity Blues, a white collar case in federal court.
Right.
There are many, many other lawyers
Okay.
that I would consider. It would depend again on the situation, which would be complicated and fluid.
And the
But these are two lawyers that I have always admired.
Mhm.
They've been mentors to me, and they're still getting great results in court.
Any opinion on the great person that your hair sort of resembles a little bit, Jerry Spence? Do you have an opinion on him?
Well, Jerry Spence was a great lawyer for sure, and Jerry Spence wrote some invaluable books, all of which I devoured
Yes.
earlier in my career, and I still enjoy reading one once in a while. They're great books, and he also did a lot of videotapes and audio tapes and how to try a case
Mhm.
before the high-tech period that we're living in now, and
Right.
I used to look at them, and anytime I could study him, I would. I have to say that he's been critical of me in a bunch of cases, and I think he was proven wrong.
Okay.
He was critical of some of my tactics in the Robert Blake case, and he was certainly critical of my tactics and strategies in the Michael Jackson trial.
Okay.
But that's okay. Reasonable minds can differ. He's been a great lawyer, and I think he's in his 90s now. I think he lives in
Right.
Wyoming. But the man made amazing contributions to the profession. His books are filled with wisdom. I don't agree with everything I read, but I agree with most of it.
Right.
And he's written some books on how to try cases that are just invaluable.
Now, mentioning Robert Blake. Now, I thought Schwartzbach ended up representing him. Gerald something.
Gerald Schwartzbach tried the case. I represented Robert Blake at one point.
Right.
We had a 3-week televised preliminary hearing,
Hmm.
which people thought would last 3 days. I turned it into about 3 weeks of cross-examination and got him bail on a murder with special circumstances case, which had never happened over prosecution objection before in the history of California.
Wow.
And he was charged with murder with special circumstances, which meant potentially he could be facing death.
Right.
I was his lawyer then after that for approximately a year. And then we were in the middle of picking a jury, and there were some issues that came up between us.
Hmm.
Jerry Schwartzbach took over the case and got an acquittal, did a great job.
Mentioning that preliminary, and I won't go into details, but I remember having a conversation with you in 1995, and you had stressed to me even then the importance of preliminary hearings and how you had this interesting view on. And so when you say you did a preliminary hearing for 3 weeks, that just sort of shows that you haven't changed that. That's one of the Mesereau doctrines, I guess.
Well, what happened was right before the preliminary hearing in the Robert Blake case, I received a call from the trial judge's clerk,
Hmm.
and they wanted to know if I had an objection to cameras in the courtroom.
Hmm.
And I thought about it, and I said, I think I'm going to do a bang-up job at this preliminary hearing, and I don't think anyone expects it because I'd come in without a lot of time,
Hmm.
and there was more investigative material in the case than the O.J. Simpson case. So I said, no, I don't object. I knew the district attorney's office had a written policy. They don't take a position on cameras. They don't support them, and they don't object to them.
Okay.
So I knew if I didn't object, they would probably come in,
Okay.
unless the judge had a problem, and the judge didn't.
Right.
So basically, cameras went in the courtroom. I was able to knock their witnesses around a lot,
Hmm.
and public opinion on court TV, which was televising the preliminary hearing,
Hmm.
changed from 80+% thinking Mr. Blake was guilty to 80+% thinking he was not guilty.
Wow.
And when he got bail, it was a big moment.
Mm.
And it gave me a bit of a national reputation, which I'm very grateful for. And one thing led to another. The Michael Jackson people saw the preliminary hearing, and at one point, as I said before, Mr. Blake and I had a falling out during jury selection, which happens in cases all the time.
Right.
And I ended up defending Michael Jackson after that.
Right, right. Trust me, I know that a person can change lawyers, and it doesn't mean that the lawyer is wrong or the person is wrong. Sometimes things happen. And I did want to ask you that question because I know you can't be specific, but I've seen a number of cases, Suge Knight, et cetera, where you've represented guys and then suddenly you will leave the case. I'm asking you a very general question, again, knowing attorney-client privilege, et cetera. What are some of the reasons an attorney would end up leaving a case?
Well, there are many different reasons. Sometimes you just don't get along with the client. Sometimes the client has listened to other lawyers who are giving advice that you don't agree with.
Right.
I mean, there's so many things that can happen.
Right.
But I would say that clients are in a very difficult position in criminal cases, particularly serious felony cases. They're under tremendous stress and pressure. And there are a lot of people trying to whisper in their ear all the time as to how they would do it and how they would do it differently.
Right.
And sometimes the people whispering in their ear are sincere and professional, and sometimes they're not. They're just manipulative and greedy and want the case. So
Right.
anything can happen.
Yes.
You know, you take any criminal case, and there's never been another case like it.
Right.
There's never been another case that has the chemistry that's operating between the judge, between the prosecutor, the defense attorney, eventually the witnesses, the jury. So every criminal case is unique. The chemistry is constantly changing and fluid. And the stress level is tremendous for the clients. So you can understand why they might say, I wonder if should listen to my lawyer or I should get other advice too. And sometimes their advice or what they want differs from what the attorney wants. There are all sorts of ways the relationship can end. And I'm not being specific to any case at all.
Right.
You look at all these cases, Menendez, O.J. Simpson,
Right.
Michael Jackson, you look at all these cases, you'll see a fluid situation with lawyers coming and going.
Right.
And again, it comes to many things: communication, what advice they're getting, what clients think about how they're being represented.
Right.
You never know who's whispering in their ear, and there are many things that can cause a rift.
Well, I'll go out on a limb and admit to you that I always thought two things about Suge Knight. I thought the biggest mistake he ever made was losing you as an attorney. And I also had this opinion in my head, Mr. Mesereau. I believed that Suge Knight wanted to bribe some witnesses, and you found out about it and you quit the case. Have you ever heard that rumor before?
I have not heard that rumor before. I'm not going to comment on the Suge Knight case.
Right.
I'm just not going to comment on anything like that.
Right. Well, I wish he had kept you, and I think he would have done a lot better. What did you think about Johnny Cochran, Mr. Mesereau?
Johnny Cochran was the greatest trial lawyer I ever saw.
And what made him so great?
He had a combination of things that were just astonishing. He was amazingly charismatic, amazingly personable, amazingly sharp and shrewd, amazingly experienced, someone that all judges, jurors, witnesses could relate to, someone who just had an enormous amount of talent, and he just resonated. I mean, what I saw him do in the O.J. Simpson case was remarkable, particularly that closing argument.
Yes.
I've never seen a closing argument like that in my life. I mean, I remember watching it,
Right.
and Court TV was switching back and forth to a panel in New York City.
Right.
And they had a panel of some defense attorneys, some prosecutors, some professors, and one of them was the district attorney in one of the counties in New York. And he made a comment that I never forgot. He said, I've been teaching at local law schools for years, and I've always been saying, make your closing arguments short. Don't tire or bore the jury.
Right.
Get in, get out, make your points. He said, I'm going to have to reconsider everything I've been teaching for 30 years after what I just saw.
Oh, wow.
He said, this is a tour de force. This is one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen.
Right.
And Johnny the emotions, the passion, the inflection, the way of communicating was remarkable. I also remember Jeffrey Toobin on CNN wrote a book, a very good book about the O.J. Simpson case called The Run of His Life. And there's a page in the book where he says he's watching Johnny Cochran cross-examine, and he doesn't think Johnny Cochran's doing well. He doesn't think he's being successful. He doesn't think he's getting the responses that he's after. And then suddenly a light bulb goes off in his head. He says, wait a second. He doesn't care what the responses are. He's talking to the jury through his questions. He's giving a closing argument through his questions. He said, "This is one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen."
Wow.
This man had so much skill,
Wow.
so much passion, so much creativity. It was just hard to see all of these qualities in one person, but there it was. He's the best I've ever seen.
Wow. I can still hear him now. Truth may be out there on a scaffold, and wrong may be in here on the throne, but that scaffold sways the future, and God watches above the dim unknown, and he will be watching you as you render your decision. Do the right thing. Find him not guilty. Still remember that from the. I probably watched the close maybe 20 times in my lifetime, but you're right. He was an amazing attorney. Have you seen anyone other than yourself who comes close to being that effective of a trial lawyer?
Well, I don't talk about myself as effective. I don't compliment myself. I mean, to me, one of the greatest things about being a trial lawyer is you're always learning, and you're in a creative process that you never totally master. If there's anyone I don't want to listen to, it's trial lawyers who think they know everything,
Right.
and think that all they have to do is teach others this great fountain of knowledge they have. To me, you're always learning, you're always experiencing new things. Every case is different. And so I don't flatter myself like that. I just don't do that. But Johnny was the best. Johnny inspired me to consider ways of behaving in the courtroom and ways of handling cases that no one else did.
Mm-hmm.
And he generated a lot of jealousy.
Right.
There was a lot of envy by other criminal lawyers, who didn't like the fact that he'd become so famous and so successful.
Right.
But he had a humility, he had a decency, he had a sense of humanity, he had an ability to communicate and relate to people, and a likability and a shrewd mind. I mean, what a brilliant mind he had for what he did. And he could walk into civil courtrooms, criminal courtrooms, you name it, and he would be just as effective time and time again. He was the greatest, and I suggest that all young lawyers read his books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Journey to Justice. I read that, and I'm trying to think of the long.
A Lawyer's Life.
Say
A Lawyer's Life.
Yes, A Lawyer's Life. Right. I read that one also. So let me ask you this: it is the day. It is the opening day of the Michael Jackson trial, which is more than the trial of a century, the trial of our lifetime, I guess. And when you walk into the courtroom that morning, what are you thinking? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Are you adrenaline is flowing? What's going through your head?
Well, that's an interesting question. You wake up, you've certainly been preparing for a long period of time
Mm-hmm.
for this first day.
Right.
And, hopefully you're professional enough and under control enough to take it one day at a time,
Mm-hmm.
to do your best from start to finish, to get into bed that night and say, "Dear God, just thank you for your guidance and keep me going."
Right.
And I didn't let anything overtake me in a heavily emotional way. I just said, "I'm a professional. This is what I meant to do. My client's innocent. I don't care if the world's attacking the client. I'm going to defend him with every ounce of strength and intelligence and the passion and emotion I have."
Mm-hmm.
So I got up. We went to court. We had to appear in front of the judge on some preliminary matters, and then we got into jury selection. And one thing led to another. I basically didn't overthink things beyond that day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, strategically, you may have an overall plan,
Right.
and you may have tactical steps you take in pursuit of that plan, and you're thinking long term that way. But to me, every day is a new adventure, a new day. I lived like a hermit.
Mm-hmm.
I was in my condo in bed at 7:30 or 8 o'clock every night.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to be seen in a restaurant or a bar or a hotel lobby because I figured the media would try to set me up and put me in a bad light, etc.
Right.
My alarm went off at 3 o'clock every morning.
Mm-hmm.
We had staff who were working around the clock. They were updating witness books.
Mm-hmm.
They had a key to my condo. They would open the door at 2, 1, 12, whatever it was,
Mm-hmm.
and drop updated witness books at the foot of my stairwell.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got up at 3 in the morning, I would look down the stairwell and see all these binders. What I wanted was for every witness I was going to examine,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted every document that referred to that witness in any way,
Mm-hmm.
whether the document was a police report, a newspaper article, investigators' notes, you name it.
Right.
I wanted them all in chronological order. So for some witnesses, I'd have 25 volumes, for some I'd have 2 volumes, whatever it was.
Right.
And I would get up at 3 o'clock, get to my coffee pot, get dressed, and just work for 3.5 hours before I went to the courtroom. And I lived that way for about 5 months.
Wow. Right after you selected the jury selection is over now. What do you think about that jury? What do you think? I have a fair jury here. What did you think?
Well, that's a very, very interesting and important question if you're interested in this case, because we were in Santa Maria, California, where
Yes.
Neverland is located nearby, but it was this particular district. They have an extremely high conviction rate, very conservative blue-collar community. A lot of people were saying, why don't you seek a change of venue? And I didn't want to change of venue because I could end up north in Bakersfield, just as conservative, where Michael Jackson didn't have a presence. I could end up south in Ventura County, just as conservative, where Michael Jackson didn't have a presence. And what I did months before jury selection, was I would go up and hang out in bars or restaurants in my jeans and black leather jacket, just minding my own business, having a glass of wine.
Okay.
And invariably somebody'd come up and say, are you Michael Jackson's attorney? And I'd say yes. And we'd start talking. And they were usually Latino or white, very few blacks, very few Asians. And I would, at some point in the conversation, say, what do you think of Michael Jackson? And the impression I got was that he was their celebrity. He was, an employer. He employed about 100 people from the local community.
Wow.
He was thought to be a nice person. The charges were horrendous. They were very disturbing, but I thought people are going to give this man a fair shake. And I also discovered that there was a concern about the DA who was from the south part of the county. There was a feeling that he was sort of from the south part, not the north part where Santa Maria was. And then I did some further investigation, and I found out there were a couple of bills introduced in the state legislature to have the north part of the county secede from the south part of the county.
Oh, wow.
And the north part of the county was more blue collar, a lower income. The south part of the county had a lot of fabulously wealthy Hollywood types.
Right.
The University of California at Santa Barbara. And to make a long story short, I did my homework as best I could. And I decided we belonged in Santa Maria. He would get the best chance in Santa Maria, California. Got into jury selection. I had a jury consultant. I didn't always agree with everything she said. And I found out that the prosecutors had a history and a habit of basically accepting the panel, and then just suddenly springing all the challenges, peremptory challenges they had banked and accumulated to wipe out whatever the defense wanted and get the kind of jury they wanted. So what happened was, and maybe I should explain myself for some of the viewers, a peremptory challenge is a challenge that a lawyer can make to remove a juror without explaining the reason. Now, you can't use them in an unconstitutional way. You can't just use it in a racially discriminatory way or a gender discriminatory way. But you can do it if there's a race-neutral way of explaining your situation. You can remove a juror without basically giving the reasons.
Okay.
So the prosecution had their challenges. I had my challenges. They started doing what I had heard they would do. They started accepting the panel, and accumulating a collection of challenges. I exercised a few challenges and then accepted the panel as well, and left more than half of my peremptory challenges on the table. And they seemed dumbfounded.
Okay.
And I did it because I felt this was the best jury I'm going to get. I liked a lot of people on the jury, not everybody, but I felt it was the best kind of jury I was going to get. It was 8 women, 4 men. And I said, we're going to do it. There were no African Americans on the jury, which my client's family were concerned about. But I said, look, Michael Jackson transcends race.
Yes.
He brings all races together. He doesn't divide them.
Right.
Look at his children. Look at his fans.
Right.
Look at what he's done for underprivileged kids all over the world. I mean, this man transcends race. He unites races. He doesn't divide them.
Right.
And we're going to do just fine. And you remember his song, it doesn't matter if you're black or white. I mean, Michael was a historical figure. He had a world impact. He still does.
Yes.
So I liked the jury I got. I didn't use even half my challenges. I surprised the prosecution.
Yeah, that's unheard of.
All their jaws dropped when I accepted the panel the way it was. So
Wow.
it all worked out.
So that sort of threw them off guard. So you felt like I have the best jury that I'm going to get under these circumstances.
Well, you never, first of all, who really knows the jurors? You see these people for the first time. You have limited time to try to study them, size them up, get information on them.
Right.
I mean, you listen, a lot of people don't understand who they are themselves. How is somebody who's just looking at them for the first time going to figure out who they are? But you bring your experience, you bring your instincts, you bring your knowledge of the client and the case, you get advice from other people, and you do your best. But I think your intuition and your instinct and your experience are the most important. I really do.
What did you think of, I don't remember what day it was of the trial, but I'm trying to imagine as an attorney what you felt when Michael Jackson apparently showed up at the courtroom and got on top of the limousine and started dancing. Did you have a conversation with him about that?
That was before I was in the case.
Okay.
That was at the very beginning of the start of the case.
Okay.
So I was not his lawyer at that point, and I wasn't present for that incident.
Okay. How did he behave and react and comport himself during the trial? I mean, if I was on trial for something like that, I think I'd be extremely nervous. Did he show it? Did he compose himself well? How did he comport?
You know, I talked to the jury foreman after Michael was acquitted of all 14 charges, 10 felonies, four lesser included misdemeanors.
Right.
I went on Larry King the next day, was interviewed for an hour, and I was asked, have you talked to any jurors? And I said, I haven't, but I'd love to. And the next day, the jury foreperson called me up and said, there are a bunch of us that would love to talk to you. So I drove secretly back to Santa Barbara. You know, the trial was over. They could talk to anybody they wanted.
Right.
And I met with them. And it was a very, very interesting conversation. But one thing, the foreperson, who was a retired school guidance counselor and principal, one of the things he commented on was just how Michael behaved, how he was unflappable, always professional, didn't get emotional from, depending on what the witness was saying, et cetera. He just showed respect for the court and respect for the whole process. And they were very impressed with his very understated, very composed, very disciplined appearance.
Wow. And how did he react when he heard not guilty 14 times?
Well, I hugged him and he said to me, thank you, thank you, thank you. And he hugged all the defense team. But the poor guy just looked battered physically and emotionally. I mean, he'd lost weight. His cheeks were sunken in. You know, this was a long trial. It was between 5 and 6 months long and 5 days a week. And he was just battered. I mean, not only was Michael not the kind of person that could sit in a courtroom like this for month after month after month, but Michael was being labeled a mob conspirator. I mean, they were saying he led a conspiracy to abduct children, to falsely imprison a family, to commit extortion. And I mean, if you know Michael, how sensitive he was, how intuitive he was, how kind he was, how humane he was, to sit there and hear them throwing these accusations at you, he wasn't built for this kind of thing, in my opinion. And it just drained him physically, it drained him emotionally. He had trouble sleeping, he had trouble coping with this, and I think he just couldn't believe he was listening to this kind of crap.
Right.
And then the horrible charges about him molesting people and that kind of thing. He was like, what is this? This is nuts. Right. And fortunately, the jury did their job. They weighed the evidence very carefully. They saw through, these ridiculous charges, and they acquitted him 14 times. He was indicted on 10 felony counts, but the judge instructed the jury that on the last 4 felony counts, if they acquitted him, they could consider a misdemeanor count. And they acquitted him of both.
Wow.
So 14 not guilties. He was very grateful, very drained. I went to Neverland after the verdicts, and he was actually in his bedroom, just exhausted. His children came and hugged the defense team, and Michael thanked all of us, and his family was there. It was not a jubilant party-like environment. It was more of a grateful to God type of solemn gathering of people who were just grateful it was over.
Wow. And what type person, if I may, what type person was his mother? Did you have any dealings with her, Catherine?
She was a lovely person, just a giant of a person. Her character, her spirituality, her belief in God, her faith that Michael would prevail. In fact, I'll tell you something about, and in response to your question that might interest you.
Mm-hmm.
There was a room up in the courthouse where we used to go during breaks.
Mm-hmm.
We'd go there at lunch. We'd go there during breaks. Actually, we didn't have a total lunch hour. The judge had us start at like 8 o'clock and leave at 1:30, and there'd be 15, 20-minute breaks in between. So there wasn't a complete lunch hour. But anyway, we'd meet up in the room. And then one day I was in there, and Michael's father, Joe,
mm-hmm.
who, along with his wife, attended the court proceedings virtually every day. I mean, Mrs. Jackson never missed a day.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Jackson, the father, missed a few days, but not very many. I mean, they were stalwart supporters of Michael.
Mm-hmm.
But the father looked at Michael, and he had his hand in a fist. And he said, "Michael, be strong. Michael, be strong."
Mm.
And I could tell that message was not resonating as well with Michael as when his mother told him, "God is with you. You will prevail. God is with you. Be strong, be patient." She had a gentle spiritual power behind everything she did and everything she said. She was clearly a kind, loving, reflective person, very, very religious. And I felt that he got most of his strength from her.
Wow.
In fact, I'll tell you something about Joe Jackson, because you've heard a lot about him.
Yes.
After the 14th not guilty, and after it was clear Michael had been acquitted on everything,
mm-hmm.
and after we'd hugged everybody and congratulated all the defense team, et cetera,
mm-hmm.
Joe came up, walking up to the front of the courtroom with a big smile on his face. Joe, again, is Michael's father.
Mm-hmm.
He put his hand out to shake mine, and he shook my hand, and he looked at me, and he said, "You're almost as good as me."
Okay. Believe it or not, Mr. Mesereau, I met Joe Jackson in Atlanta, Georgia, with my mentor, Reverend Hosea Williams. I mean, I feed the hungry through my church, and I got my feeding the hungry spirit, if you will, from Reverend Hosea Williams, who was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s chief field general. But Joe came to one of our Feed the Hungry programs about 3 days before we were getting ready to do it, and we fed 30,000 people that year. And Joe asked Reverend Williams, "How much money have you raised?" And Jose said, "It doesn't matter how much I've raised. What matters is I don't have enough." And he said, "What are you short?" He said, $10,000. And Joe Jackson gave him $10,000 cash money, cash. I couldn't believe someone had that much cash on them to feed the hungry in Atlanta. So that was my one-time meeting Mr. Joe Jackson. So my opinion of him was, quite frankly, pretty positive, if you will. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back after this. You're watching one of the most sought-after lawyers on planet Earth, Tom Mesereau. They don't come any better than Tom. And it's very, very difficult to get a high caliber, the highest caliber lawyer like that on a podcast. And so I'm humbled, grateful, thankful to God that he came on. And I hope that this adds credibility to what we're doing at Yes We Can with Pastor Sherman, D.Manning. I want to ask every lawyer, every law student, every law professor, every pastor, every person watching this podcast to realize you can produce a podcast like this one right from home. But what I found out you can't do alone is house the homeless and feed the hungry. I would hope and pray that God would let me be as respected by my peers in pastoring and preaching as Tom Mesereau is as an attorney. And I hope that that respect and credibility won't lead to me becoming wealthy, but it'll lead to getting guys like you and ladies like you and gentlemen like you to contribute your tax-deductible offering, donation, gift to this ministry to help us house the homeless and feed the hungry. Please go to yeswecanworshipcenter.org right now. Scroll down to the bottom of the page. You can send $10,000, $20,000, $100,000. No amount is too big or small. And I know there might be many of you who can only send $5 or $10. We need that also. Your help will put food in the bellies of hungry men, women, and children, and it will get people off the streets. We live in the wealthiest nation on planet Earth. And I just find that it's criminal to see people sleeping like they do in Skid Row and in many, many other parts of Los Angeles. I am asking you today, don't just flip through this and get back to the interview, but make a note that when the interview is over, you're going to yeswecanworshipcenter.org and you're going to help us house the homeless and feed the hungry by sending your tax-deductible donation today. Share this video, share this podcast with a friend. Now, let's get back to the one and only Tom Mesereau. Okay, and so I'm glad that you were able to prevail there. Going back to Mr. Kunstler, what is your opinion? Do you think he was right? Even though we're in 2022, we've had a black president, we have a progressive district attorney in Los Angeles, in which many people are trying to get him out of office. They think he's too progressive. Do you think minorities in the criminal justice system get a fair shake?
I think we have the best system in the world. I haven't seen a better one, but the system is filled with flaws, filled with problems, as you would expect, because it's populated and run by human beings. Mm-hmm. And human beings have weaknesses. Human beings are imperfect. Human beings are sometimes blinded by ambition, by greed, by any type of emotion you can think of. So my response to that is, unfortunately, human beings try to look down on somebody. Mm-hmm. They don't always know they're doing it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the worst kind of racism is subconscious racism as opposed to conscious racism. Mm-hmm. But because humans have a certain tendency to want to think they're better than someone, to look down on someone, to put someone's needs and hopes and dreams, on a lower level, I think minorities do pay a price in the system, and that price is inequality, lack of being valued the way others are valued. Mm-hmm. And I think it's something we'll never defeat. Mm-hmm. It's something we always have to be aware of and always have to be conscious about and do our best to rise above.
Right. We can only ameliorate it. We can't cure it. Joseph in the Bible in Genesis chapter 30 is my William Kunstler, if you will, because I went to prison like Joseph went to prison. And what you just said brought something back to me. I found it just asinine. And I'm going to put this in my new book that I'm writing right now called Jail. And that is, they're in prison, Mr. Mesereau. Talk about people finding some kind of way to look down on someone else. There was a building, Building 8, New Folsom State Prison, and it had 3 sections, A section, B section, C section. It fascinated me that the guys who resided in A section, in a state prison, in a jail, in a concrete cell, considered themselves better than the guys who lived in B and C section because they waxed the floors and kept it a lot cleaner than the other guys. And the guy who did most of the waxing was a former police officer. You could Google him. His name was Richard Ford. They call him Doc. Eric Menendez was also in that section. He and I were porters. We were tier tenders together. And we would always debate about the foolishness of them, Eric and Ford, thinking they were better than the other guys who lived in B and C. And of course, they wanted me to move to A section because I had a little bit of money, but I always refused to do so. But I just remember sitting to myself thinking, we're in jail. We can't get out. Society thinks that all of us are predators and no good, and we have the nerve to discriminate against one another based on where a person resides. But I think you're correct. We will never totally eradicate that as long as we're dealing with human beings. I know you don't brag, and you're not arrogant, you're not cocky, and I like that about you a lot. But I do have to ask you, most of us engage in self-analysis, even as a pastor. Preaching is very important to me. I'll go back and watch my sermons and say, I could have done this better. I should have done this. I'll critique myself. What do you think is your strongest trait, even though you're as humble as you are, as an attorney, so far as a trial is related? Do you think you're a master cross-examiner? You think you're a closing argument? What is your best trait as an attorney, so far as trials are concerned?
I try my best to humanize the person I'm representing, mm-hmm. to, first of all, learn who the person is from a human standpoint, mm-hmm. And then try and figure out a way to communicate that in the courtroom in an effective way. Mm-hmm. I also think I'm creative. There are a lot of things criminal defense lawyers are taught, and many criminal defense lawyers follow those rules in an inflexible way. Mm-hmm. there's so many assumptions that criminal lawyers pass on to new generations that are then repeated in the courtroom almost in a rote kind of mechanical way.
Right.
I've always been the kind of person that tried to figure things out as best I could myself after studying very intensely what other lawyers were doing and why they were doing it. For example, in the Michael Jackson case, I got up in my opening statement and I told the jury I would prove the man was innocent. And I told them to hold me to my contract. When this thing's over, I'm going to prove to you he's innocent,
Right.
or words to that effect. I was immediately criticized all over the country for
I read
assuming a burden of proof.
Right.
When the law says you don't have any burden of proof. All you have to do is show reasonable doubt.
Right.
Well, my feeling was that Michael was being so vilified all over the world. The press and the media were so punishing on him, so mocking of him, so degrading of him. I said, look, I can't just get up there and talk about a presumption of innocence or the burden of proof the prosecution has or what reasonable doubt is. I have to get up and let them know the truth is on our side and we're going to show it to you. We're not afraid of it. So I assumed a burden right in my opening statement. I think sometimes criminal defense lawyers get too scared of their cases. I've put clients on the stand a lot more than most have. In fact, I probably have put clients on the stand more than anyone I know in every kind of case, white collar, non-white collar, murder, you name it.
Right.
I think sometimes, if you look, let's take a piece of evidence that looks very, very damaging to the defense.
Right.
And in my opinion, there are three things the defense lawyer can do with that piece of evidence. And we're speaking theoretically. He can pretend it doesn't exist.
Okay.
He can find a slimy, tricky explanation for it. Or three, he can turn it to the defense's advantage. And the greatest criminal defense lawyers do number three.
Okay.
They don't ignore it. They don't find a slimy explanation for it. They turn it to their advantage. They find a way to do it. And they don't run away from their case. They embrace their case. They don't act like they're afraid of it. They're actually totally unafraid of it. So I think every convention that gets passed down to criminal defense lawyers is probably meant to be broken in one form or another at certain periods of time.
Right.
The best, there's a reason why some are better than others.
Right.
I mean, if you assume that everybody's bright,
right,
everybody's well-educated, everybody's experienced, everybody's tried cases, what is it that makes others often and sometimes just consistently better than others?
Right.
I think it's humanizing their clients. I think it's creative decision-making in the courtroom. And I think it's a willingness to break the conventional rules.
There you go. And that describes humbly my style of preaching. I was taught to be an expository preacher. And I just believe in thinking outside the box. And I think that lots of times things are passed on because this is the way it should be done, because this is the way we were taught it should be done. And I think, well, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it this way instead. Let me tell you, it has been a fascinating time to actually sit down and talk with you. By the way, I got to get this in so that I don't get in trouble. Betty Ann Waters, I told you about her, her brother, Kenny Waters. She went to law school, got a degree, and got him out of prison along with the help of Barry Scheck. And she's going to come to Los Angeles to my church in a couple of months, and she wants to meet you. And I told her I would do everything I could to try to set up, maybe take her to lunch or something, or just bring her to your office. She's met Barry Scheck, but she says that Barry Scheck says you are the best. So she told me to tell you that, and I said I would tell you on the podcast itself. I do have to ask you about Cecil Murray, just a famous noted pastor who was known around the world for the great work he did at Fame. You talked about him being a great leader. What do you think made or makes him a great leader, even though he's no longer pastor there?
Well, he's a great human being, first of all. I know the last day he preached at First African Methodist Episcopal Church, everybody was honoring him, and a homeless man tried to get in the door, and security was keeping him out, and he immediately stopped what he was doing and said, "Let that man in." And he hugged this homeless man, and that's who Pastor Murray was. I know that there were times through the decades that there'd be some gang murders in South LA. A lot of the other churches would not allow the funeral in their church, and Pastor Murray would say, "Everyone's a child of God. Everyone has value. We'll do the funeral."
Wow.
He would do things that others just would not do, and he would do it with courage and conviction, with a sense of humanity, a sense of kindness. He would visit children at hospitals on a regular basis. He was a scholar of religion. He's now in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Southern California, USC. He's a distinguished professor. He just had a certain sense of love for people, a love for his church, a love for the community. I mean, many credit him with stopping the rebellion that followed the Rodney King verdicts in '92. Many people think the calming, the peace that eventually set into Los Angeles was really his doing. He just had the respect of everybody, rich, poor, sophisticated, unsophisticated, educated, uneducated. Everyone loves Cecil Murray, and everyone still does.
Right.
And he's still going strong. He's in his 90s. He's
Wow.
at USC.
Wow. Wow. Have you written any books, Mr. Mesereau?
I haven't. I've been working on a book off and on for a number of years with a young journalist in England, and I'm hoping in the next couple of years to get a book out.
You have to, because, I mean, there are thousands of young attorneys and attorneys-to-be around the world, for that matter, who want to know what you have to say. And I hope that in some small way, this 1 hour with you, and I was planning on 30 minutes, has in some way elucidated for them the things that help make you the great man that you are. Anything you want to say before we go, Mr. Mesereau?
Well, I want to first of all thank you again, Pastor Manning, for inviting me on the show, for giving me an opportunity to express myself the way you have. I think one of the things our society needs is we have to encourage people to express themselves. We have to encourage people that they have value no matter what stage they're in life, whether they're on the street, whether they're in a big mansion, I don't care who they are. People are troubled, people are complicated, people have issues, and we need to let them know at all times they have value, and that's what God does, and that's what religion does. And I want to thank you for letting me be on your show.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Thank you for coming. One of the greatest trial lawyers who has ever lived. God made a way for him to agree to do this podcast. Please remember that Yes We Can Worship Center houses the homeless. We feed the hungry every day of the week. And also remember that you can make a difference. We can change this world. We can do it together. Yes, we can.
Gosh, your body.